The mountains gave him back at last. 11 days on foot through shale and snow, the rifle a dead weight across his shoulders. The horse limped behind him, head low. He had stopped hoping weeks ago. Most men who went into the Beartooth did not come out. But the valley below was not the ruin he had prepared himself to find. Smoke rose steady from the chimney, pale gray against the white October sky. Not the thin, desperate thread of a squatter's fire, the patient smoke of someone who had laid wood that morning and meant to stay. New fence posts ran clean along the creek road. In the south pasture, cattle moved slow and heavy through grass that should have been nothing but wind and memory. He stopped the horse at the foot of the porch steps. A woman stood at the top, tall, shoulders square under a canvas apron. She watched him without fear, without welcome, just the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided how this would go. The wind shifted, carried the low sound of cattle settling and the creak of leather as he swung down from the saddle. She did not move. The horse smelled home before Cole did. Pepper. 15 years old, one white sock on the left foreleg, and a disposition that had soured considerably over 3 years of mountain travel. She lifted her head somewhere past the last ridge, ears forward, pulling at the bit with a purpose. She hadn't shown since before the drive started. Cole let her have her head. He was too tired to argue with a horse. The descent from the Beartooth had taken 11 days on foot. After Pepper threw a shoe on loose shale, 11 days, walking rifle across his shoulders, eating whatever moved slow enough to catch. Sleeping under a canvas sheet that had more holes than he could comfortably count. He had not counted them. He had stopped counting things after the third winter. A freight hauler named Orrin Pratt had picked him up at the edge of Coulter County, took one look at him, gaunt-faced, bearded down to his collar, coat that was more patches than original cloth, and offered a ride without being asked. Left him at the county line with a firm handshake and the careful eyes of a man who wasn't sure the person in front of him was going to make it. Cole had said, "Thank you," and meant it. Now, coming down through the pine timber toward the range property, he couldn't hold a thought for more than a few seconds. His mind kept skipping. Ruth's face. The east fence that always sagged in spring. His foreman Dix, 61 years old when the drive started, who caught a fever in the second winter and didn't come back from it. Cole had buried him under a spruce at 8,000 feet and stood there for a long time afterward, not praying exactly, just standing. He thought about the bank. 3 years of missed mortgage payments wasn't an abstract number. It was a story with a specific ending. He knew what abandoned homesteads looked like out here. The way the roofs went first, then the fences, then the land just swallowed everything back. Quiet and patient as a tide, he had watched it happen to neighbors, to men he'd respected, men who ran out of time, ran out of money, ran out of options, in that order. Men who had left for a season or a surgery or a bad stretch and come back to find the world had moved on without them. He thought about coming around this last bend in the road and seeing nothing but collapsed walls on high grass. The mental image was so practiced that he had almost prepared himself for it. Almost. The mountains behind him were indifferent to whether he made it. They had been indifferent to the other men who hadn't. The cold made no distinctions. The altitude had no memory. 3 years up there had stripped away a lot of things. The weight on his frame, the color from his beard, the comfortable certainty that effort was enough. What the mountains hadn't stripped away was the habit of moving, of putting one foot in front of the other, even when the reasons for doing so had become abstract. He was 40 years old. He felt every year of it. Boots risoled twice on the trail. A body 30 pounds lighter than the one that had ridden out of this valley 3 years ago. But still moving. The October sun was doing what October suns do in that country, giving just enough warmth to remind you what warmth was before it quit for the day. The pines on either side of the trail smelled sharp and clean, the way they always smelled, after the first hard cold. He had spent 3 years in country that smelled like this, and he still wasn't tired of it. Some things you don't get tired of. The smell of cold pine was one of them. He thought about what he'd do if the ranch was gone, not in a planning way, In the concrete way you think about things when you've had too long on the trail and your mind has nothing else to work with. He'd go north, maybe. Oregon. Find work as a hand on someone else's operation until he had enough put aside to start again somewhere smaller. He had done harder things than starting over. He knew that now. 3 years in the mountains will teach you that you are capable of more than you thought, and also that most of what you thought you needed, you don't. What you need is narrow. Food, shelter, a reason. He hadn't been sure, coming down off the last ridge, that he still had a reason. And then Pepper lifted her head. Pepper took the last bend at a walk. Her ears were up. Her stride had changed in the last mile, something closer to eager. The particular energy of an animal that recognizes terrain it has crossed 1,000 times before and knows the barn at the end of it. Cole sat back in the saddle and let her choose her own pace. He was about to find out what 3 years and a missed mortgage had left him. Smoke, real smoke, not wildfire, not brush burning, not the thin acrid smell of something that had gone wrong in the night. Chimney smoke, pale gray and steady against the white October sky, rising from the main house chimney like it had been rising every morning. Like someone had put wood on a fire that morning and gone about their business, like someone was home. Cole pulled Pepper up at the ridge and sat in the saddle without moving. He sat there for a long moment, just looking. The way a man looks at something he has braced himself not to see. The fence line along the creek road was standing. More than standing. New lumber. Light pine that hadn't weathered to gray yet. The post tops still bright where they'd been cut. Someone had driven those posts in the last season. Maybe 2. The wood was too clean for anything older, and whoever had driven them knew what they were doing. The spacing was right. The depth was right. The wire strung taut in a way that told you the person doing it understood that a fence is only as good as its worst post. The south pasture had cattle in it. He counted 28, maybe 30 head from where he sat. Herefords mostly. Solid animals. Not the ribby, hollow-flanked look of livestock that had gotten through a hard year on willpower alone. These animals had been managed, rotated on good grass, fed through 2 Montana winters by someone who knew what winter feeding looked like and planned for it before the first snow. The barn roof was patched. He could see the clean line where old shingles ended and new ones began. A third of the way across, right where the back slope had been collecting water and turning it into rot since well before he'd left. The chicken yard had birds moving in it. The kitchen garden on the south side of the house had been cut back for winter the right way. Not abandoned. Prepared. Cold crop still showing green against the dark soil. Someone had planted a winter garden. Had planned ahead for a winter they intended to be here for. He put his heels to Pepper and rode down. The closer he got, the more he saw. The east culvert that had backed up every spring for 10 years. The one Dix had been threatening to dig out for the better part of a decade. Looked like someone had actually dug it out. The drainage channel was different. Lower. A new stone edge along the south bank. Done in spring by the look of it, when the ground was soft enough to work, but the creek was still running cold. The more he saw, the less he understood. He was close enough to see the porch now. She was standing at the top of the steps. Cole stopped Pepper at the bottom of the porch stairs and looked up. His first thought was simple and immediate. That was the tallest woman he had ever seen in his life. Not tall the way some women are tall. A few inches past what people expect. Close enough to the ordinary that it registers only in passing. Tall like a different category entirely. 6 feet and then some. Wide shoulders under a canvas work apron. Hands visible even at this distance, and they were not small hands. They were hands that looked like they had spent 2 years doing exactly what the condition of his ranch suggested. They had dark hair pulled back, practical and plain. A smear of ash or flour along her left forearm. Work boots at the base of the porch steps that were. He could see now, at least 2 sizes larger than anything he'd ever owned. She was watching him come in the way you watch a thing you've been expecting for a long time. Calm. Measured. Not afraid. Not even particularly surprised. She had her arms crossed. Cole took off his hat. His mother had raised him to take his hat off in the presence of women. 3 years in the mountains hadn't beaten that particular habit out of him. Some things go too deep. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Her voice was lower than he expected, steady. The voice of a person who doesn't raise it often because she doesn't need to. A silence followed, the kind that had weight in it. "I'm going to guess," he said carefully, "that you already know who I am. Cole Raines." She said it plain. "Not a question. You're considerably thinner than I was expecting." He blinked. "You were expecting me?" "Not on any particular day." She came down one step, stopped there. That single step brought her almost level with his eye line, which meant standing on flat ground. She had 4, maybe 5 inches on him. "I knew you'd either come back or you wouldn't. I figured I ought to be ready for either." Cole looked at the fence line, the cattle, the patched barn. He looked back at her. "You've been here a while," he said. 2 years and about 5 months, he turned that over. 2 years and 5 months. While he was in the mountains, while he was watching the party reduce from 7 to 2, while he was eating what the snow preserved and learning to sleep through the sounds a mountain makes at night when it's deciding about you. "The mortgage," he said. "Current." He stared at her. "The bank is current, yes. No apology in it, no performance. Just the fact, stated the way you'd state that the sky is gray in November." He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I don't know how to ask this without sounding ungrateful for something I don't yet understand. So I'm going to ask it. Plain." She waited. Whatever she'd expected him to say, she was prepared to hear it. "Who are you?" he said. "And what are you doing on my land?" Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something gentler than the careful neutral face she'd been wearing, like a door opened an inch. "My name is Vera Stanton," she said. "And that's a longer answer than you look like you have the energy for right now." She turned and went up the steps. "Come inside," she said. "I'll feed you first." He tied Pepper at the rail. She wouldn't go anywhere, and she deserved water and feed. But those could wait 3 minutes, and followed Vera Stanton up the porch steps and into his kitchen. His kitchen. He stopped inside the door for a moment. Just stopped. The warped floorboard by the stove was still there. The window latch that never sat quite right was still there. The way the afternoon light came through the west window and hit the back wall at an angle that made the whole room feel like it was made of amber. That was still there too, but it was changed. Changed in small ways that added up to something significant. Herbs drying from a beam he'd never used for that. Bundles of what looked like yarrow and sage, tied with twine, hanging at intervals. The cookware arranged differently on the hooks by the stove, organized by size in a way that made practical sense, and that he'd never thought to do. A new crossbar under the kitchen table where the old one had cracked. He could see it from here. Heavier wood, set at a slightly different angle, the work of someone who'd thought about the problem before fixing it. An agricultural circular on the shelf near the door, worn at the spine from actual use, not just kept for reference. And near the hearth, a pair of work boots. Several sizes larger than any women's boots he'd encountered in 40 years of living. Risoled recently by someone who knew how. Vera Stanton put a bowl of bean soup in front of him and a plate of cornbread. She didn't say anything while he worked through the first bowl. She didn't say anything while he worked through most of the second. She just sat across from him with a mug of coffee and waited. She had the quality, he was beginning to understand, of a person who is comfortable with silence because they've spent a lot of time alone and have stopped expecting it to be filled. Not uncomfortable silence, not the tense kind. The other kind. The kind that means the person has somewhere inside them enough to keep them company when there's no one else around. He found it strangely easier to sit across from than most people's talking. When he finally pushed the second bowl back and looked at her, she began. She'd homesteaded a quarter section about 40 miles south, she said. Came out from Nebraska after her husband, Calhoun, passed of a fever the summer of 1880. About a year before Cole's cattle drive started. Small piece of land, small herd. A debt to the feed merchant in Garrison that had gotten away from her after Calhoun died, and the drought that year had taken most of the crop besides. I was 3 days from losing the property, she said. I'd been to every neighbor I had, every person I knew, and there was nothing. I was packing what I could carry. Cole nodded. He'd seen that story before. A bad year, a death, a drought. The sequence didn't need to be dramatic to be lethal. To a small operation, I'd never seen at my door, she said. She looked down at her coffee mug. He said he'd heard from someone in town that I was in a bad spot. A pause. He paid the feed merchant directly, the full amount. Came to my door, handed me the receipts, said the debt was settled. She looked up. And then he left. The kitchen was quiet enough that Cole could hear the wind coming around the corner of the house. An October wind. It would be November soon. He had a strange feeling starting somewhere in his chest. The kind of feeling that comes when you're about to be surprised by your own past. He didn't say what he wanted in return, Cole said. Nothing. I asked his name and he said it didn't matter. She held his gaze. I found out later from the merchant who he was. He'd already left town by then. How much? Cole said. $80, he remembered it. He had been passing through on a supply run. Early 1881, maybe 2 months before the drive started. Heard from the Garrison feed merchant himself. Offhand, the way men mention things they can't quite set down, about a widow about to lose her quarter section. Tall woman, the merchant said. Came in from Nebraska. Husband died in the summer. Cole didn't remember making a decision exactly. He just remembered that it seemed wrong to walk past. The kind of thing you either do or you don't, and the deciding happens before the thinking does. He had paid the merchant, pocketed the receipt for his own records, and ridden on. He'd had a supply list to fill and a drive to plan. He had not thought about it since. That was me, he said. I know. He looked at her. You've been here 2 years and 5 months. Because of $80, because of what it meant, she said quietly. There's a difference. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the herbs drying from his beam, the new crossbar on his table. Thinking about the repaired fence and the 30 cattle in his south pasture, and the fact that his land was alive when it had every reason not to be. Why didn't you just? He shook his head. There are easier ways to settle a debt. You could have sent money. Found someone to pass word. I didn't have money to send, she said it without apology. The way you'd say the sky is gray in November, weather. Plain and unremarkable. And when the debt is that kind, money isn't what you pay it back with. She turned the coffee mug in her hands. When I heard you'd died, when everyone was saying you'd died, I heard the ranch was going to be taken. The bank was already talking about it in Garrison. The timeline was months, not years. So I came. He got up from the table, went to the window, stood looking out at the south pasture where his cattle stood in the October light. He needed something to do with his hands. 28 years old. This woman, coming into a dead man's property with $80 worth of conscience and 2.5 years worth of work to show for it. You had your own place, he said. Sold it? Used the money for this? The first payment. And seed. A pause. It was a hard first year. He turned from the window. Hard, she met his eyes. Steady. Unhurried. Cole had seen a lot of people describe hard things. Most of them made sure you felt the weight of it. Made sure you understood the sacrifice before you got to the end of the telling. Vera Stanton said the word hard, the way you'd say the word wet. Describing rain, matter of fact. Like it was just weather, and everyone knows what weather is. The pipe cracked in the well first winter, she said. Lost most of the kitchen garden to rabbits before I got the south fence sorted. 2 cattle got into the creek quarter. 1 broke a leg. She paused. I had to deal with that. He knew what dealing with that meant. On a ranch, alone, in winter, with ground frozen too hard to do what you'd prefer to do. And no man within calling distance. And nothing but the work in front of you, and the knowledge that you either handle it or it handles you. The neighbors, she said. After a moment, something shifted in her voice. Not vulnerability. More like the way a person's voice changes when they're describing a thing they've made peace with, but would not pretend was easy. They didn't know what to make of you, he said. That's one way to put it. She stood up from the table, and Cole watched her unfold herself to full height, and he thought, yes, that would be it. In a county where most men topped out at 5'11", a woman of her height would be something people had no ready category for. She would be the thing the room noticed, first. Every room, every time. She would be the subject of the conversation that happened after she left, and sometimes before she arrived. They had names for me, she said, her back to him now, carrying the bowls to the wash basin. Some said them to my face, some behind fences. She worked the pump. Children would come to the fence line and stare. Men at the feed store would stop talking when I walked in. Cole was quiet. How did you manage it? She looked at him over her shoulder. Same way you manage most things out here, she said. You just keep working. And at some point they stop staring and start watching. And then they realize you're getting the job done. She turned back to the basin. Takes long with some people, than others. He slept for 3 days, not because he planned to. His body simply took the decision out of his hands. A real bed, under a real roof that didn't leak, on an actual mattress. Something in him that had been clenched tight for 3 years finally let go, all at once, like a fist opening. He would wake, eat whatever Vera had left on the table, sleep again. She never said anything about it, never hovered, never made it strange. She simply operated the ranch with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it alone for 2 years and didn't require an audience or commentary. On the 4th morning, he woke before dawn, feeling more like himself, or at least more like a version of himself that could manage a full sentence without losing the thread partway through. He went out to help with morning chores. She was already in the barn. They worked in the particular silence of 2 people who don't know each other's rhythms yet. She fed the horses while he pitched hay. They arrived at the same narrow passage between the stall rows at the same moment and had to navigate around each other in the tight space. He stepped left. She stepped left. Both stopped. Up close, in the low barn light, the reality of her height was fully there. He was 5'11" in his boots. She had 4 clear inches on him. Standing this close, he had to tilt his head slightly to meet her eyes. I'll go right, she said. Right, he agreed. They passed. You muck left-handed, she said, watching him work. Always have. It shouldn't have been funny. It wasn't particularly funny. But something in the absolute matter-of-fact delivery, the way she noted it like an agricultural fact, the way you'd note that a fence post was set at the wrong angle, or that the east culvert needed clearing, made him smile. For the first time. In longer than he could easily calculate, she smiled slightly too. Brief. Like she'd let it out before deciding whether to, and they went back to work. By the end of the first week, he had a clearer picture of what she'd done and what it had cost. She had sold her quarter section for $800. A number low enough to tell him everything about the state it was in when she sold it. She'd used that money to catch the Rains mortgage up. 3 payments behind when she arrived, and then covered the next 4 herself, one at a time, selling cattle at prices she described openly as terrible, because she had no leverage, and the buyers knew it. She had paid roughly $200 out of her own pocket over the 2 years beyond the initial investment. She had fixed the barn roof using timber she'd cut herself and floated down the creek on a makeshift raft, because she couldn't afford hauled lumber. Cole heard about the raft from Harlan Cross, his neighbor on the creek road. A big weathered man in his 50s who shook Cole's hand with both of his and said, "Damn glad you're not dead," 3 separate times, with the sincerity of a man who meant it exactly as literally as he was saying it. She built that raft herself, Cross said. Standing in the yard, hat in his hands, lashed it, loaded the timber, rode it down the creek bend, unloaded at the barn corner. He shook his head. I offered to help. She said she had it, did she? She had it. Cross's wife Doris had come out onto the porch by then. She said it with a different kind of certainty, not admiring, exactly, but something more solid. The certainty of a person who has watched someone work and has drawn her conclusions. All of it, Cole.
I don't think there's a single thing that woman can't lift.
Cross glanced toward the house where chimney smoke was still rising. There was talk when she first came, he said, careful with the words. Woman alone on a dead man's property. And, well, her being what she is. Hers all, he shifted his weight, People had opinions. How'd she handle it? Cross almost smiled. Every time somebody showed up with an opinion, she'd be in the middle of something. Fencing. Mucking. Building that channel repair on the East Culvert. 4 days with a hand shovel in April mud. He put his hat back on. Hard to maintain an opinion about a woman who's up to her knees in your drainage ditch fixing a problem nobody else wanted to touch. They stopped saying them out loud, Doris said from the porch. Which is as much as you get with some people. Cole thought about that on the walk back to the house. Doris was right, and the rightness of it was both accurate and slightly depressing. You didn't change what people thought. You just made the cost of saying it out loud high enough that they kept it to themselves. That was the best available outcome. He wondered how long it had taken Vera to figure that out. And what it had cost her in the meantime. Cole went to the bank on Monday. The banker came on Friday. His name was Edgar Voss. Pale, thin man from back east. Had never been entirely comfortable with the physical reality of frontier life, and managed this discomfort by carrying himself as though he were operating in slightly better circumstances than the ones currently surrounding him. He arrived at the ranch in a clean coat and polished boots, which told Cole everything he needed to know about how Voss had spent the last 3 years at a desk, not out in anything that might dirty a boot. He shook Cole's hand with the professional warmth of a man very aware of how much money was in play, Mr. Raines. We were. I'll be honest with you. He paused with the precision of a man who has rehearsed this exact moment. We were approximately 6 weeks from beginning foreclosure proceedings when Mrs. Stanton arrived. She told me. Voss's gaze moved toward the house and back. The arrangement going forward, the mortgage, gets paid. Cole said, same as it's been. Yes, but Mrs. Stanton's name isn't on the. I'll work that out with your paperwork. I'll come in next week. Voss opened his mouth, thought better of it, and left. Cole watched him go with the faintly satisfied feeling of a man who has ended a conversation at exactly the right moment. That evening, Cole told Vera about the conversation. She listened carefully and then said, I'll need to go back to Garrison. He turned to look at her. She was standing at the window, arms crossed, looking out at the cattle coming in from the south pasture for the evening. The last October's light catching the side of her face, turning her profile into something spare and deliberate, like a thing carved for use rather than display. What do you mean, he said. The ranch is stable. You know where everything is now. I think the transition can be managed without too much. Where in Garrison were you planning to go? A pause. I have some money saved. Enough to start over. Start over where? I haven't decided. Cole was quiet for a long moment. He could see her reflection faint in the window glass, her expression arranged into the careful neutrality of a person who has already made a decision and is now presenting it as though it's still open. He had only known her a week, but already he knew this face, the one she wore when something mattered and she didn't want it to show. He had learned it the way you learn things about people when you share close quarters, not through direct observation, but through accumulation. The small patterns, the tells. The way she pressed her lips together when a number in the ledger came out better than expected. The way she went completely still when she was listening to something that mattered. The way she never, not once in 7 days, asked for help with anything she judged herself capable of doing alone. You've been here 2 years and 5 months, he said. Yes, in that time, you fixed the barn roof, rebuilt the herd, kept the mortgage current, dug out the East Culvert by yourself in April mud, kept this whole operation alive through 2 Montana winters. She said nothing. And your plan, he said, was always to leave. Yes, because you felt the debt was paid back. A long pause. That's right. He stood up from the table. She didn't turn around. You don't owe me anything, she said. Steady, serious. The voice she used for things that mattered and that she needed him to actually hear. I need you to understand that. I didn't come here to be paid back. I know that, he said. I figured that out. About 3 days after I got here, he wasn't talking about payment. She looked at him with those level eyes of hers, and for the first time since he'd ridden in, he couldn't quite rid what was behind them. I'm talking, he said, about what happens to this ranch if you leave. I'm talking about the fact that you know this operation better than I do right now, and you will for the next year at least, while I find my footing again." He stopped, then more quietly, "And I'm talking about the fact that this kitchen feels like a kitchen when you're in it, and an empty room when you're not." She said nothing, but she unclasped her hands. "Stay," he said. "Not for the debt, not for anything you owe me. Stay, because we can build something here that neither of us can build alone." The last October sun came through the window at a low angle and cut across the table between them. Outside, the cattle were settling into the south pasture, moving with the slow, purposeful energy of animals that know where they're going. Above them, the chimney smoke rose straight up into a sky the color of pewter. Vera Stanton looked at him for a long time. "I'll think about it," she said, and turned back to the window. The banker came on Friday. His name was Edgar Voss, pale, thin man from back east. Had never been entirely comfortable with the physical reality of frontier life and managed this discomfort by carrying himself as though he were operating in slightly better circumstances than the ones currently surrounding him. He arrived at the ranch in a clean coat and polished boots, which told Cole everything he needed to know about how Voss had spent the last 3 years, at a desk, not out in anything that might dirty a boot. He shook Cole's hand with the professional warmth of a man very aware of how much money was in play, "Mr. Raines. I'll be honest with you." He paused. "We were approximately 6 weeks from beginning foreclosure proceedings when Mrs. Stanton arrived. She told me." Voss's gaze moved toward the house and back. "The arrangement going forward. The mortgage. Gets paid," Cole said. "Same as it's been." "Yes, but Mrs. Stanton's name isn't on the—" "I'll work that out with your paperwork. I'll come in next week." Voss opened his mouth, thought better of it, and left. That evening, Cole told Vera about the conversation. She listened carefully, and then said she'd need to go back to Garrison. He turned to look at her. She was standing at the window, arms crossed, looking out at the cattle coming in from the south pasture for the evening. The last October light catching the side of her face. "What do you mean?" he said. "The ranch is stable. You know where everything is now. I think the transition can be managed without too much. Where in Garrison were you planning to go?" A pause. "I have some money saved. Enough to start over." "Start over where?" "I haven't decided." Cole was quiet for a long moment. He could see her reflection faint in the window glass, her expression arranged into the careful neutrality of a person who has already made a decision and is now presenting it as though it's still open. He had only known her a week, but already he knew this face. "You've been here 2 years and 5 months, he said. "Yes. In that time, you fixed the barn, roof, rebuilt the herd, kept the mortgage current, dug out the east culvert by yourself in April mud, kept this whole operation alive through 2 Montana winters." She said nothing. "And your plan," he said, "was always to leave." "Yes, because you felt the debt was paid back." A long pause. "That's right." He stood up from the table. She didn't turn around. "You don't owe me anything," she said, steady. "Serious. I need you to understand that. I didn't come here to be paid back, I know that," he said. "I figured that out about 3 days after I got here." He wasn't talking about payment. She looked at him with those level eyes of hers. "I'm talking," he said, "about what happens to this ranch if you leave. I'm talking about the fact that you know this operation better than I do right now. And you will for the next year at least, while I find my footing again." He stopped then, more quietly. "And I'm talking about the fact that this kitchen feels like a kitchen when you're in it, and an empty room when you're not." She said nothing, but she unclasped her hands. "Stay," he said. "Not for the debt, not for anything you owe me. Stay because we can build something here that neither of us can build alone." The last October sun came through the window at a low angle and cut across the table between them. She thought about it for 4 days. 4 days of working alongside him as though the conversation hadn't happened. Barn at dawn, cattle rotation. Books in the evening. She didn't avoid him. She didn't make it strange. She set the question down on a shelf somewhere inside herself and continued to operate the ranch with the same focused efficiency that had kept it running for 2.5 years. On the fifth morning, he came in from the well and found her at the table with her coffee. The mortgage ledger was open in front of her. She wasn't reading it, just sitting with it. She looked up when he came in. "Equal partnership means equal say," she said. He set the water bucket down. "Yes. If I think something should be done one way and you think it should be done another way, we talk it through. Neither of us just decides." "Agreed. And if at some point the arrangement needs to end," she paused, "we end it cleanly, without it becoming a problem." "Agreed," he said again. She looked at the ledger, looked back at him. "All right," she said. She closed the ledger, finished her coffee, and went back out to the barn. That was how it was decided. No ceremony, no handshakes. Just two people, arriving at a practical conclusion about an impractical situation in a kitchen that still smelled like that morning's cornbread, in an October that was already threatening to turn cold. Cole went to the bank on Monday. He put it to Voss plainly. He wanted Vera Stanton added to the mortgage agreement as an equal party. Voss said that was unusual. Cole said things worth doing were. Voss looked at the account. Current, not one payment behind. Maintained by a woman alone. Through 2 complete cycles of Montana seasons, and decided that unusual was something he could accommodate. The papers were drawn on Wednesday. Vera came to town to sign them. Signed them the way she did most things, quickly, without ceremony. But Cole noticed she kept the copy of the document folded in her coat pocket the whole ride back instead of putting it in the saddlebag. He didn't mention it. The town had opinions. Not all of them unfriendly. There was a contingent. Mostly the women who had watched Vera manage the Rains Ranch alone for 2 years. Who had bought her surplus eggs when she had them and sold her flour when she needed it. Who received the news of the arrangement with something approaching approval. Doris Cross told her husband it was the most sensible thing to come out of the Rains place in years. But there were others. The first sign came at Garrison's General Store. A man named Walt Gruder, who ran the largest cattle operation on the county's north end, was holding court near the stove when Cole came in for fencing supplies. Big man. Small eyes. The particular confidence of someone who had never seriously questioned whether the room was listening. "Rains," he said. "Loud enough for the whole store. Heard you made that widow woman a partner." "Word travels," Cole said. Unusual arrangement. Gruder looked at his companions. 2 men Cole knew. Both of them Gruder's people in one financial arrangement or another. Man goes missing 3 years, comes back, finds a woman running his place. And he spread his hands. "Signs it over." "I didn't sign it over." Cole was examining a roll of wire, keeping his voice level. "She earned it." "There's a difference." Gruder's expression didn't change. "Some people might say a woman like that, alone on a man's property for 2 years. "I'd stop there," Cole said. He looked up from the wire. "Not in a way that requires me to respond to it." Gruder held the look, made a calculation, and let it go. But the expression stayed. And over the following weeks, Cole heard various versions of the same conversation coming back to him through the informal channels that carry information in small counties. Vera heard it too, and said nothing about it, which Cole had come to understand was not the same as not caring. She just put things into Chicago and dealt with them there, privately, without advertising the process. The one time he brought it up directly, she was mending a bridle at the kitchen table. "It bothers you," he said. She kept her eyes on the leather. "Some of it," a pause. "The part about my size bothers me. People have decided my dimensions are relevant to my character." She set the bridle down. "They look at me and they think, a woman that large has to have something wrong with her. Because if nothing was wrong, the world would have found a way to make her smaller." Cole said nothing. "You can't argue people out of a story they've already decided to believe," she said. "You just have to outlast it. How do you outlast it?" She picked up the bridle and went back to work. "Same way you outlast everything out here. You keep working." He found Ruth's grave on Thursday. He hadn't gone looking for it exactly. He'd been walking the west fence line, checking posts, and come around the back of the hill that overlooked the creek. And there it was. The grave was where he'd left it, where he'd buried his wife 2 seasons before the drive. After the fever took her in 5 terrible days and left him so gutted and so lost that the cattle expedition had seemed like the only available option, because he couldn't bear to be in that house anymore. And motion, just putting distance between himself and everything, was the only thing he knew how to reach for. He had left a wooden cross. Rough cut, because at the time he couldn't do better. Because grief had made his hands clumsy and made the simplest tasks feel like work done underwater. He had told us he would do better when he got back from the drive. There was a headstone now, cut limestone. Not large, but properly shaped, properly carved, in clean letters, worked with care and patience. Ruth Raines. 1851-1880. Below that, in smaller letters, carefully spaced, she was here, and it mattered. He ran his finger along the letters. Not a stonemason's work, but not amateur either. Someone had taken time with this. Real time. Someone had looked at a rough wooden cross in a Montana field and decided it was not enough and had done something about it. Someone who had never met Ruth Raines. Who knew nothing about her except the name and the years, and the fact that a man had loved her enough to grieve her hard enough to run from it. There were dried wildflowers at the base. Yarrow. Mostly, long past fresh, but tied neatly. Placed with intention, not just laid there. Cole stood there for a very long time. When he came back to the house, Vera was at the stove. She must have felt him standing in the doorway because she turned. "The stone," he said. She turned back to the stove. "Set down the spoon she was holding. I had it done the second spring," she said. "There's a man in Garrison who does stonework. You paid for it." "Yes." A silence. "I left a wooden cross," he said. "I left it because I couldn't." He stopped. Started again. "I was going to do better when I came back." "You did what you could at the time." She turned to face him. Something in her expression. Waiting. Careful. Like she'd been holding a breath for a while and wasn't sure if she could let it out. "I knew what a wooden cross in a Montana winter was going to look like in 2 years." She said it simply. Not as accusation. Just as a fact she had acted on, the way she acted on most facts. Quietly, without announcement. Cole Raines had held himself together through 3 years of cold and near starvation, and watching good men die in blizzards. He had kept moving through 11 busy days of walking out of the mountains alone, when Pepper went lame on loose shale. He had made himself function when functioning felt impossible. He did not keep it together, standing, his kitchen doorway, looking at a woman who had put a proper stone on his dead wife's grave and found words he hadn't known how to say. He turned and went back outside, walked to the barn, sat down on a hay bale, spent about 10 minutes being thoroughly and completely undone in the private, silent way that men of his time and disposition allow themselves to fall apart, which is to say, completely, briefly, in total solitude. Then he washed his face at the trough off, fed Pepper, and went back and inside to help with supper. There is something people talk about when they talk about kindness. The calculated kind, the kind that expects return. That's not really kindness, that's investment. An investment is fine for what it is, but it's not the same thing. The kind Cole had done in Garrison in early 1881 was different. He had been past something from a merchant about a widow, about to lose her land. He didn't deliberate, didn't weigh it, didn't think about what came after. He just thought. It seemed wrong to walk past. The kind of thing you either do or you don't, and the deciding happens before the thinking does. He had paid the merchant, pocketed the receipt, and ridden on. He had not thought about it since. And here was the thing. The thing that doesn't fit neatly into the version of a story you'd tell at church or print in a newspaper. Most acts of ordinary decency go nowhere visible. Most good things done quietly travel no further than the room they happen in. The math of kindness is not reliable math, but sometimes a thing travels. Through years and distance, through other people's decisions and other people's grief, and arrives back in a form you couldn't have planned, couldn't have designed, not as reward, not as the universe settling accounts. Just as what happens when one small decent thing, given freely and without condition, gets picked up by someone who decides it deserves to be answered, and who happens to be the kind of person who, once they decide to do a thing, does not stop until it is done. October 1884 turned to November. The temperature dropped a few degrees each week, the way it does in that country, not sudden but steady. Relentless. Patient as the land itself. Cole spent the first 2 weeks relearning his own property, walking the fence lines, checking the cattle, getting his hands back into the rhythm of work his body had known since boyhood. But his mind had to rediscover, after 3 years of different rhythms entirely. He and Vera began to find their rhythm, slowly, carefully, in the way that two people build something when they've both had reasons to be cautious. She took the horses. He took the cattle. She cooked everything except Sunday dinners, because she was better at it, and they both knew it. He managed equipment repairs. She kept the financial records, because she had a better head for figures, and they both knew that too. They moved around each other in the kitchen, in the barn, in the narrow passage between stall rows. Getting better at stepping right. Winter came the way Montana winters come. Not gradually. Not with warning you could actually prepare for, all at once. Like a door being shut by someone who means it, the first real storm hit the 3rd week of November. 2 feet of snow in 36 hours. The kind of cold that doesn't just land on the skin, it gets into the walls of a house and sits there, like a tenant who knows you can't afford to evict them. None of their preparation prevented the water pump handle from snapping off in Cole's hand on the second morning of the storm. Clean break, right at the joint. He stood there holding it. He came inside and set the broken piece on the table without a word. Vera looked at it, looked at him, looked back at it. "How bad?" she said. "Not a question. An assessment. Need to heat the pipe before we replace it," he said. "Or we'll crack it. I've got rags," she said. And coal oil. She was already moving. That was the thing about Vera Stanton. She didn't pause at bad news. Didn't stand there letting the weight of it settle in. She moved toward the problem before the problem had finished announcing itself. Cole had spent 3 years in the mountains with men who either had that quality or didn't. The ones who didn't, most of them didn't make it past the first winter. They spent the better part of the morning working in shifts. One out at the pump, heating the wrapped pipe in a wind chill that made staying outside for more than 15 minutes genuinely dangerous. The other warming by the stove. Switching. Back and forth. Vera's hands were better than his at the detail work. Steadier, more precise. She was the one who finally seated the new handle correctly, leaning in close to see what she was doing, while Cole held the pipe steady. At one point her shoulders was against his arm. Neither of them moved away from it. They fixed the pump. They did not say anything about the shoulder. They went back inside. The thing about sharing a small house through a Montana winter with another person. You learn things that ordinary acquaintance doesn't show you. What hour they wake up. What sounds they make when they're in a bad mood versus tired versus genuinely worried. Cole learned that Vera woke at 4:30 every morning, without exception. Didn't matter when she'd gone to sleep. Didn't matter how hard the day before had been. 4:30. She made coffee before she did anything else. Drank it, standing at the kitchen window looking east. Not at anything in particular. Just at the dark, and then the gray, and then whatever the morning decided to be. He started getting up at 4:32. He told himself it was because there was work to do. Which was true. Not the complete truth, but true enough. By January, they had stopped explaining themselves to each other. He would go out to check on the south cattle at dusk without saying where he was going, and she would have his coat at the door. She would need the hammer from the barn, and it would already be on the table where she was working. Small calibrations. The kind that happen invisibly when two people are paying enough attention to each other to anticipate without being asked. Cole noticed this. He wasn't sure Vera did, or maybe she did and simply filed it in the same category as the fence posts and the ledger. Things that needed doing done. There was something restful about it. Something he hadn't expected. He had lived alone for 2 years before the drive, after Ruth died. Had thought he was getting used to it. Had thought the particular silence of a house with only one person in it was something you could learn to stop noticing. He had been wrong about that. They argued for the first time in December. Not dramatically. No raised voices, but it had heat in it. Cole thought, moving the herd to the east quarter for the latter part of winter would give the south pasture time to recover. Vera thought the east quarter drainage was too uncertain. "You're being overcautious," he said. She looked at him. "Steady. Unhurried. You haven't been here for 2 winters. You're missing some information." That landed. He felt it land. He was quiet for a moment that stretched a little longer than comfortable. "All right," he said. "East quarter stays empty. Thank you. You could have just said you had more experience with it." "I did say that. You said it like an accusation." She looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't mean it like one, I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's still difficult sometimes, hearing about things that happened here when I wasn't here." A silence. Not uncomfortable exactly. "Just honest, I know," she said. "I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that closes a door, the kind that opens one." And so for the first time they talked, carefully, about what those 3 years had actually been like. Him in the mountains, her on the ranch. The way time moves differently when you're surviving versus when you're waiting. He told her about the winter of 1882. Party of 7 reduced to 2. 11 days camped in a hollow under a fallen tree, eating what they had, and then what they could find frozen in the snow. The sounds a mountain makes at night that you learn to stop thinking about, because if you start thinking about them, you'll stop moving. She told him about the same winter from her side. 6 weeks with the south drifted shut. 4 cattle dead. Lamp oil so low she started going to bed when it got dark. "How early did it get dark?" he said. 4 o'clock. By January, she looked at the dead fire. "I went to bed at 4 o'clock for 6 weeks. A woman alone in a winter house, dark at 4 in the afternoon, and up at 4:30 every morning anyway. I thought about you," she said. He went still. "Not." She caught herself. "I mean, I thought about whether you were alive. Some nights I'd work out the timing, try to figure where you might be, what the conditions would be at that elevation in that month. What did you decide?" She looked at the fire. "I went back and forth. Some nights I was sure you were dead, and everything I was doing here was just caretaking a corpse's property." A pause. "Other nights I was sure you weren't. And I'd get up and go back to work." This was before you knew. Long before he thought about that for a while. A woman he'd never met. In a house that wasn't hers. In a winter that was trying to take everything. Calculating whether a stranger was still alive somewhere in the Beartooth Range. Getting up anyway. "Why?" he said, not challenging. Genuinely asking. She looked at him for a long moment. "Because it didn't change what needed to be done," she said. That's all. He wasn't sure that was all. He didn't push it. January brought a man named Roy Phelps, property man out of Helena. Well-dressed in a way calculated to impress, without quite fitting the country he was operating in. The cut of the coat was right, but the boots were wrong, and a man who knew anything about ranch work would have known the boots were wrong. He sat his horse in the yard and explained calmly that he represented a group of investors acquiring land in the valley for a consolidated grazing operation. Named a price that was fair in the abstract and completely beside the point. Cole said they weren't selling. Phelps smiled the smile of a man who expects to be told no the first time. "I understand there are some financial pressures on the mortgage." "The mortgage is current," Cole said. "Yes, but the next year's payment." "We've considered it," Vera said. She had come out while Phelps was talking, drying her hands on a cloth, standing on the porch 2 steps up, which meant she was looking down at Phelps. On his horse, the geometry of it was not accidental, and the geometry of it clearly made him uncomfortable. "No, thank you," she said. Phelps looked at her, took in her height, her expression, the fact that she seemed entirely unbothered by his presence in the way that very tall women, sometimes, aren't bothered by things that are meant to be intimidating, because they've spent a lifetime learning that most intimidation is theater, and theater only works on people who agree to be an audience. "Perhaps we could." The lady said no, Cole said. "I take that as final." Phelps left with his pleasantness reduced by about 40%. That evening Vera put the ledger on the table, and they went through the next year's numbers. Spring payment was manageable if cattle prices held. If prices dropped, tight. Bad spring on top of that. Very tight. We need a good calf crop, Vera said. We need the east pasture drainage fixed before spring, Cole said. I know. The materials, we spend the money and do it right. Bad drainage cuts into the calf crop. Calf crop cuts into everything. She tapped the page with her pencil. Did the math? Twice. We'd have about $40 of margin on the spring payment. $40. Yes. He looked at that number for a long time. $40 between the ranch and a missed payment. A missed payment that starts the whole cascade they'd been holding off. All right, he said. All right, she said. They ordered the drainage materials the following week. Not comfortable, but right. And what Cole noticed afterward was how easy the decision had been once they got through the numbers. Not easy because the money was there. Easy because there was no argument about what mattered. They were pointed in the same direction. He thought about that later, mending fence in the January cold. Two people. Same direction. Ruth had been pointed in a direction too. Hadn't always been his. They'd loved each other well, and argued often and made it work, because they were both stubborn enough to outlast their disagreements. He missed her with the constant low ache of something permanently absent. The way you miss a tooth, not agony, just always, the awareness of the gap. Vera was something different, not a replacement, but something was building in that house through that winter that he didn't have an easy word for. Something that had less to do with the mortgage and the partnership and more to do with 4:30 in the morning. And a kitchen window and a shoulder pressed against his arm in the cold, and neither of them moving away. He was not going to say anything about it. Not yet. There was too much at stake. February was the worst month. The storm that hit the second week wasn't as long as the November one, but it was meaner. They lost one calf, born too early, didn't take. Vera had been up with it through the night, and she came in from the barn in the gray morning looking worn out in a way that went past tired. I'm sorry, Cole said. It happens, she said. I know. But I'm still sorry. She sat at the table. He poured coffee without being asked and set it in front of her. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at nothing for a while. It's always the ones you tried hardest with, she said. He sat down across from her. Calhoun was like that, she said quietly. He went very still. She didn't look up. Sick for 3 weeks. I tried everything I knew of. Everything the almanac said. Everything the doctor wrote down in a letter I sent. A pause. He died anyway. Cole didn't say anything. Just sat with her in the cold kitchen with the storm working against the walls. Because sometimes sitting is what there is. After a while, she finished the coffee and stood. I'm going to sleep 2 hours. Then check on the south herd. I'll check the south herd, he said. Sleep as long as you need. She looked at him. Something in her expression he couldn't entirely name. Thank you, Cole, she said, and went to her room. He sat alone in the kitchen after she was gone. The storm making the kinds of sounds a storm makes when it has more to say, a low persistent working at the seams of things, the particular sound of weather testing what you've built and deciding how serious it intends to be. The walls held, the fire held, and somewhere outside the herd was standing in the shelter he and Vera had built together, waiting out the cold the same way the two of them were. Not comfortably, not without cost, but stubbornly, and side by side, he thought about what she'd said. About Calhoun dying anyway. About trying everything, and then watching it not be enough. He'd had that feeling too in the mountains when the fever took Dick's. Had done everything he could think to do, and then stood there and watched it not matter. The cold and the altitude and whatever had gotten into the older man's chest had simply been more than everything Cole could do. That was a particular kind of loss. The kind where you couldn't have done more, and you know it, and it doesn't help to know it. You carry it anyway. You put it somewhere you can manage it and you carry it. He suspected Vera had gotten very good at putting things somewhere. She could manage them. He suspected it had taken a long time to get that good. He pulled the ledger toward him and looked at the numbers for a while. Not really reading them, just having something to look at. The fire shifted and settled, and he let it go without getting up to add wood. It would be all right until morning spring came all at once, with attitude. The snow went out in a week of warm rain. The creek ran high and fast, and the drainage work they'd spent the winter's margin on proved itself that March, the East Quarter handled the runoff better than it ever had. The calf count came in at 24. Not a record, but solid. The kind of number that makes the next mortgage payment feel like a real thing instead of a hope.
Vera wrote the figures in the ledger in her careful handwriting and pressed her lips together in a way Cole had learned to recognize
as the closest she came to showing relief publicly. 24, he said. Better than the last 2 springs, she said. I'll take it. They made the spring payment with $18 to spare. It was the spring of 1885. Cole thought about Roy Phelps and his Helena investors, and felt something settle in his chest that was not quite satisfaction but was close to it. It was that same March when Cole first heard the name Seth Morrow. He heard it from Jim Brower. Brower ran a medium spread about 12 miles north, on the other side of a low ridge, 15 years on that land, careful and watchful in the way of a man who has been observing something approach for a while and isn't yet sure whether to name it. He had the manner of someone who has been keeping a private ledger and is finally ready to share the numbers. Consolidated Valley Partnership, Brower said when Cole rode out to see him. They've been buying up land in the valley. Quiet, at first. Purchase offers. Reasonable prices. When people said no, they found other ways. Water rights challenges. Property title questions. Things that take 2 years and a lawyer to resolve. Things that cost money you don't have. He named a ranch on the South Fork, in a title dispute for 18 months. By the time they got it sorted, they'd burned through their reserve. One bad winter finished them. Consolidated bought it at a third of what it was worth. Cole looked at him. And you think Morrow's looking this way? I think the Raines property sits right in the middle of where he wants to go, Brower said carefully. I think he looked at your mortgage situation and figured you were an easy target. He paused. I think he didn't account for Mrs. Stanton. Cole rode home with that. He told Vera that evening. She listened without interrupting, completely still, not filling the pauses. When he finished, she said, He'll try the partnership agreement first. He'll claim it's not legally valid, she said. Because I'm a woman, no drama in it. A strategic assessment, the way she assessed most problems. In this territory, a married woman can't own property independently of her husband. I'm a widow, which is a different status. But a good lawyer could argue the partnership requires a male co-signer under certain clauses. She paused. He'll find an angle. Men like that always do. You've thought about this already. I thought about it when Phelps came. People who send a property man don't accept the first no. What do? We get ahead of it, she said. We see a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Harwick Fenn, 60 years old, pleasantly rumpled, with the air of a man who had been doing frontier law long enough that genuinely surprising things had mostly stopped happening. His office smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco. He read the Raines partnership documents with the thoroughness of someone who was not going to have an opinion until he'd read everything twice. Solid, he said. The bank may disagree, Cole said. The bank drew these up. Their own attorney signed off. Fenn tapped the papers. If they argue the documents are invalid, they're arguing their own work is invalid. That's not a case. That's a headache, he looked at Vera. You've been operating as equal partner for, he checked his notes, 23 months. Since the autumn of '84, yes. There's a legal doctrine called ratification, Fenn said. When one party behaves consistently with the terms of an agreement over a significant period, that behavior ratifies the agreement. Regardless of technical questions about the original execution, he folded his hands. The bank has been cashing your payments for 23 months. They've ratified this partnership 6 ways from Sunday. Cole looked at Vera. She was looking at Fenn, with the expression of someone who is not yet prepared to be relieved, so they can't challenge it, she said. They can try. Courts are unpredictable. Lawyers are expensive. Fenn paused. But if I write a letter to Mr. Voss laying out those documents, and that doctrine, and if I make it apparent that any legal challenge will be a matter of public record in this county, my experience is that banks choose the clean path when it's available. The letter cost $35. Voss received it on a Thursday. The following Monday, he sent word that the bank considered the Rains partnership agreement to be in good standing. No further reference was made to any concerns. Cole read the response twice to be sure he'd understood it correctly. Then he put it in the ledger, where Vera kept the important documents. She would file it properly later. She filed everything properly. That's one angle closed, Vera said that evening when he told her. One, he agreed. She looked at the fire. He'll find another. I know. People like Morrow don't adjust their goals. They adjust their methods. Cole thought about that. He'd known men like Morrow on the cattle drives. Not the same kind. Not land-hungry, not operating on this scale, but the same fundamental structure. A man who had decided that a particular outcome was what he was owed by the world, and who interpreted every obstacle, not as a reason to reconsider, but as evidence that he needed to be more creative in his approach. Then we stay ahead of the creativity, he said. Vera almost smiled. Almost. But Seth Morrow was not finished. Not even close. The bank avenue was closed. He needed another way in. What he found was more personal, and it landed harder. Someone, Cole never proved who, though he had a clear enough suspicion, began circulating a story through Garrison's social channels. Specific enough to sound researched. Vague enough to be unrefutable. The architecture of something designed to do damage rather than be true. The story said Vera Stanton had come to the Rains Ranch not out of any debt or principle, that she had no other options, that there was a history of financial impropriety back in Nebraska, unpaid debts, questionable dealings, that her motivation for the partnership was to use Cole's name and land as cover while she rebuilt a reputation she destroyed elsewhere. And then, the part that cut deepest, the story said her size, her physical difference, her strangeness, was evidence that a woman of her dimensions couldn't be trusted to operate normally. That something had to be wrong with a woman who looked the way she looked, and ended up where she ended up. Too big, too strong, too much of something that respectable women aren't. Vera heard about it on a Friday in June from Doris Cross, who told her, with the directness of a woman who believes you deserve to know what's being said about you, even when it's hard to hear. Vera came home that evening quieter than usual. Cole knew the quality of the quiet meant something had happened. She told him at supper. Level voice, described it like information being transmitted, not complaint, not performance, but he could see it in her hands. Which were still in a way they usually weren't. When she finished, he said, "It's not true. I know it's not true. I know my own history." Then it's not about whether it's true. She looked at him. It's about what people decide to do with it. If enough people hear it enough times, it doesn't have to be true to do damage. She looked at her plate. The other ranchers, the ones who've been having trouble with Morrow, if they start wondering whether the woman who organized the meeting has something to hide. Vera, I'm not saying I believe it. I'm saying it's a problem. He pushed his plate back. What do you want to do? She was quiet for a moment. I want to find out who started it and... She stopped. But I can't do that. That's what he wants. He wants us reacting instead of building. She took a breath. We do nothing. We let it run. We keep working. We show up and do what we said we'd do. Some people will believe it. Some people were always going to find a reason. And then she said, "Do you want to know what my history in Nebraska actually was? Only if you want to tell me." She held his gaze. Working my husband's farm, keeping his accounts. Trying to have a child, a pause, small. Precise as a scalpel. The child didn't survive past 4 months. Cole did not move. She said it quietly, without drama. The way a person states a fact about a year that cost them something they don't get back and have since built a structure around. Because you have to build a structure, or the whole thing collapses. There were debts after Calhoun died. There are always debts after someone dies, and the person who managed the money is suddenly gone. I paid what I could. I moved west because the land was cheaper, and the possibilities were less already spoken for. She held his gaze. That's the whole story. It's not interesting enough to be a scandal. He was quiet for a moment. The baby, he said. She nodded once. The nod of someone who has made a degree of peace with something. and is not inviting you all the way inside, but is leaving the door ajar. A girl, she said. I had names picked out. She looked at the table. Calhoun was sick by then. He never quite understood what we'd lost. He was already too ill. Cole didn't say he was sorry. He'd learned by now that Vera didn't need the word. She needed the thing he was already doing, sitting there, not flinching, not redirecting, not making it about him. Just listening. I was 24 years old, she said. 6 feet tall. I had just buried a baby and was about to watch my husband die. And the only thing anyone in that town seemed to notice was that I was too big to cry in a way that looked normal. She said it with a careful, dry precision. People don't know where to put their sympathy when they're also uncomfortable with you. They just sort of back away slowly. 24 years old, grieving 2 people at once. In a body that made other people's grief look inconvenient. In a town that couldn't figure out how to feel about her even when there was no question about what she deserved. That's why you came here, he said. I came here because of the debt, she said, and then quieter. And because there was no place I felt useful. My size, my strength, wasn't the first thing people saw. It was the only thing. Always, she looked at the window. On this ranch, the work didn't care how tall I was. The calf didn't care. The fence post didn't care. The drainage ditch absolutely did not care. She turned back. I know that sounds like a strange thing to be grateful for. No, Cole said. It doesn't. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. The first time he'd done that, she looked down at his hand. Then she turned her hand over, gave us a brief firm press, and took it back, not rejection. Something more precise. The acknowledgement of a person who is not yet sure how much she can hold, and knows herself well enough not to test it right now. They showed up to the next morning the same as every morning, 4:30. Coffee. Window facing east, the dark becoming gray, becoming whatever the day decided to be. The real attack came in September. Morrow went above Voss to the bank board. He argued, through his attorneys, never directly, that the Rains partnership agreement was invalid under a territorial statute regarding women's property rights. Not because of ratification, not because of the documents, but because Vera Stanton could not legally be party to a real property agreement without a male guardian's co-signature under a specific clause in certain territorial jurisdictions. It was a genuinely creative interpretation of an obscure statute, and it was designed not to win in court. It was designed to cost money and time and create uncertainty, during which the uncertainty itself would be the weapon. Fenn read the filing and looked at Cole and Vera with the expression of a man who is not surprised, but is nonetheless annoyed on a professional level. What he's doing, Fenn said, is using existing ambiguity to create expense and doubt. Make it cost you enough and you sell, or you miss a payment and the bank moves. What do we do, Cole said. We respond to the filing. We make it clear we intend to contest it fully. Fenn thought for a moment, and we find out whether any of his other neighbors have been having similar trouble. A man who tries this once has usually tried it before. Cole brought that piece home. He sat on it through the lambing weeks of March 1887, while they managed a late-season cold snap that threatened the new calves and required 3 days of essentially no sleep, working in shifts. Vera taking midnight to 4, Cole taking 4 to 8, then overlapping for the heaviest morning hours. By the time the cold snap broke, they'd saved 21 of 23 calves. Lost 2 that were never going to make it regardless. The morning after the temperature came back up, Vera sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands for about 30 seconds. Not crying, just depleted. Then she straightened up, pushed her hair back. Coffee's already made, Cole said. She looked at the mug she hadn't noticed. I didn't even see that. You're not quite awake yet. I haven't been quite awake since Tuesday. She drank, looked at the ledger. 21, she said. 21. That's a good number, she said. Like she was reminding herself. It's a good number, he agreed. They sat in the particular silence of 2 people, too tired to fill it, and not needing to. In April of that same year, Cole rode out to see the Brower family. Harwick Fenn had said, find out if Morrow has done this to other properties. A man who tries this once has usually tried it before. Jim Brower's kitchen was not a large space, but Brower's wife, Ada, was in it. And Ada had the manner of a woman who has been waiting for someone to show up and ask the right questions for quite a while. Cole told them everything. The partnership challenge, the bank board, the attorneys from Helena. When he finished, Brower looked at his wife. Ada looked at Cole. "How many properties do you think he's pressured?" she said. "5 that I can identify. Maybe more. And the ones that are still holding on, still in the legal fight. They're paying Morrow's price every month in lawyers' fees." "Exactly," Cole said. "So we changed that," Ada said. Brower caught where this was going. "You're talking about contesting together. Same filing, same challenge, split the legal costs. Morrow is counting on us being isolated," Cole said. "He moves one property at a time because fighting one rancher is easier than fighting 5. Brower looked at Ada. She unfolded her arms. "Does the Rains Ranch," she said to Cole, "have a woman partner who spent 2 years keeping it alive alone?" Cole blinked. "Word travels. I make it my business to know who my neighbors are." She looked at Brower. "If she's willing to fight Morrow, we fight alongside her." Brower nodded slowly. "Yes." Cole rode home with something that felt cautiously like momentum. He found Vera in the barn and told her about Brower, about the pattern, about the joint legal challenge. She listened completely still. "There's a risk," she said when he finished. "If this becomes public, he escalates. He has more resources than we do, I know that. And you want to do it anyway." "He doesn't stop," Cole said. "We keep responding to each thing he tries, and it costs us. And eventually one of them lands at the wrong moment, and we're done." He looked at her. "Or we make it expensive enough for him that it's not worth it." She was quiet for a long moment. "A community meeting," she said. "Garrison's Grange Hall, or somewhere like it. Every rancher in the county who's had trouble with Morrow, we lay it out. We let people decide what they're willing to do. That puts a target on us," he said. "We already have a target on us," said with the quiet certainty of someone who has been carrying one long enough that its weight no longer surprises her. "At least this way we're doing something with it. You'd be there. At a public meeting, in front of the whole county. After everything that's been said about you." She looked at him with the level patience of someone who has been managing other people's discomfort with her existence for as long as she can remember. "Let them look," she said. The meeting was set for the second Thursday in May. In the 3 weeks between, Cole and Vera rode separately to every property they'd identified. Told the story straight. Asked the question. Not everyone said yes. 2 operations declined. Cole and Vera didn't blame either of them. Being cautious when you're broke is not cowardice. It's arithmetic. But Brower said yes. The Dalton family on the South Fork said yes. And a widow named Agnes Holt, who ran a small sheep operation and had been fighting a water access challenge for 14 months, said yes with a firmness that made clear she'd been waiting for someone to organize this for quite a while. 4 ranches, 4 sets of legal costs going to 1 consolidated filing. 4 voices saying the same thing in the same room. The night before the meeting, Cole came in from the last cattle check and found Vera at the kitchen table with a piece of paper. She turned face down when he came in. He made coffee and sat across from her. "You're going to speak first," he said. She looked at him. "You kept this ranch alive, alone for 2.5 years before I came back. Everyone in that room knows that. When you stand up and talk about what Morrow is doing, they're going to hear it differently than if I say the same words." "You're not wrong," she said. "Are you nervous?" "Some." She looked at the turned-down paper. "I don't like rooms full of people looking at me." He understood what she meant. Not ordinary public speaking nerves. The specific weight of being looked at when you have spent a lifetime being looked at for reasons that have nothing to do with what you're saying. "They'll look at first," he said, "and then they'll listen. People stop seeing the size when they start seeing what gets done." He paused. "A meeting room's not so different from a drainage ditch." Something moved through her expression. Not quite a smile. "Get some sleep," he said. "I will." She picked up the turned-down paper, notes in her careful hand, and folded it. "Thank you, Cole, for going to Brower before you told me, for coming home and asking me to stay. A pause. For all of it, he didn't know what to do with that. So he said, "Get some sleep again." She went to her room. He sat alone in the kitchen with his cold coffee. He pulled on his coat and went out to check the cattle one more time. The stars were out, the night was cold and still, and in the house behind him, a light went on in the back room. 4:30, a little early. But then, tomorrow was the kind of day you wanted to be ready for. The Grange Hall in Garrison held 40 people with some crowding. On the second Thursday of May, 53 came. Not all of them because of Morrow. Some came because something was happening, and in a small county, something happening is worth attending. Some came because Agnes Holt had been talking to people, and Doris Cross had been talking to people. And the particular informal network through which real information moves in a frontier community, which is to say, the women, had decided this mattered and acted accordingly. Seth Morrow was not there. His absence was so deliberate, it was almost a presence. Vera spoke first. She stood at the front of the hall in her good dress, dark blue wool, the nicest thing she owned, bought in Garrison the previous spring, and altered herself. She looked at the room, the way she looked at difficult work, directly, without flinching. She was, in that room, taller than every person present, man or woman. Every single one. She let them look. 1 full second. Just stood there and let them take in whatever they were going to take in. The height, the shoulders, the hands that had driven fence posts through frozen ground and floated timber down a creek on a raft she built herself. Let them look. And then she started talking. She laid out the pattern. The purchase offers that came first, polite and reasonable. The legal filings that followed when the offers were refused. The water challenges. The title questions designed not to win in court, but to cost money until the money ran out. The ranches that had already been absorbed by the Consolidated Valley Partnership and were now part of something that had no interest in the people who used to live there. She named the properties. She named the amounts. She cited the documents. Because she had the documents, organized in the way she organized everything, carefully, with attention to what was going to matter when it mattered. Her voice was steady, clear, lower than most of the women in the room, carrying the way voices carry when a person has spent years making themselves understood across distances, across winds, across the noise of work that doesn't pause to let you finish your sentence. When she finished, the room held the particular silence of 53 people, deciding what they think. Then Harlan Cross, sitting in the third row, said, "How do we stop him?" And Jim Brower, from the back, said, "That's what we're here to figure out." What followed was not orderly. It was a room full of ranchers with opinions, and no investment in the protocol of meetings. It went in 4 directions, at once. Cole spent 40 minutes managing it the way you manage cattle, not pushing, just redirecting, keeping the energy moving towards something useful. He was better at this than he expected. Vera caught his eye once from the front of the room and gave him the smallest nod. He understood it to mean, "You're doing fine," which, coming from Vera, meant he actually was. At the end of 2 hours, they had 7 ranches signed to a joint legal challenge, a commitment to take the consolidated case to the Territorial Water Board rather than the county courts where Morrow had cultivated relationships, and enough money raised in voluntary contribution to cover the first stage of legal costs without any single operation taking the full weight. 7 ranches against 1 man, with more money and better lawyers than all of them combined. Not a victory. A better position. They rode home in the long evening light. The valley laid out below them as they came down the ridge road. Cole pulled up at the top in the old habit, and Vera pulled up beside him. 7 ranches, she said. 7 ranches, he said. Is it enough? He was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was he didn't know. The truer answer was something else. It's what we've got, he said. So we make it enough. She looked at him for a moment in the long evening light, then looked at the ranch, their ranch, both of theirs, documented and fought for, and held by margins too thin to be comfortable and too real to be anything other than what they were. All right, she said, and put her heels to her horse and started down. Morrow made 2 more moves before the water board hearing. The first came through the bank board. A technical clause in the original mortgage language about material changes in ownership structure. Fenn responded with a 40-page legal argument summarized as, "Try it and we will be in territorial court for bad faith lending practices, and every rancher in this county will know exactly what happened." The board did not invoke the clause. The 40-page letter cost $60. The second move was the rumor campaign at full strength, coordinated now across all 7 coalition ranches. The story about Vera went everywhere, hit some people. 2 operations that had been considering joining the coalition held back. Vera heard all of it and handled it by continuing to work. Cole watched her and thought about what it costs over a lifetime to be the kind of person who keeps working when what you want to do is stop and make people understand. One evening, when the stories were loudest, Cole put down Fenn's latest filing. "I want you to know something," he said. She looked up. "Whatever they say about why you came here and why you stayed, I know why." "I've known for a while," he held her gaze. "And I want you to know it's not lost on me. What it cost, what you gave up, what you went through." Alone, she was very still. "The $80 was an accident," he said. "I did it because it was in front of me and it seemed wrong not to. I didn't think about it afterward, I know that," she said quietly. "But you thought about it. You thought about it enough to come 600 miles and spend 2 years and everything you had to answer it." He looked at her. "That is not a small thing, Vera. I don't have words for it that are equal to what it actually was." She looked at the papers, then back at him. "You don't have to have words for it, I know. But I wanted you to know I understand." She was quiet for a long moment. "That helps," she said. "More than you might think." The Territorial Water Board hearing was held on a Tuesday in July. 9 ranches represented in the room by the time it opened. 2 more had joined the coalition in June. Fenn sat at the front with his papers in the order of a man who has a system and trusts it. Vera sat beside Cole in the second row, with her own copy of every document. Morrow's representation was a firm from Helena. 2 attorneys, well-dressed, well-prepared, the kind of men who bill by the hour and don't feel the cost of it. They were good. They wanted everyone in the room to know they were good. Fenn was one man with a small county practice and 20 years of frontier water law, which meant 20 years of actually walking the land, knowing the actual history, understanding what the document said and what the ground said when those 2 things disagreed. When Fenn put Jim Brower on the record to describe 3 specific seasons of water access, one year in particular where the flow reduction had demonstrably cost him a portion of his calf crop, the board chair leaned forward, asked a question, specific, technical, about historical flow rates at a specific point on the creek system. The kind of question that required knowing the actual land, not just the documents. Morrow's attorneys exchanged a look. They didn't have a clean answer, because the answer was in the land, not in a filing. Cole watched that exchange and understood that the hearing had shifted. He looked at Vera. She was already looking at him, expression controlled. But her hands, he'd learned to watch her hands, were still in a way that meant something was happening behind her eyes. She'd known. She'd put that question in Fenn's materials, the way Fenn had built to it with Brower's testimony. Like he was walking toward a particular destination he'd scouted in advance. That was Vera. Planning 3 steps ahead. Like she always did, the board took the matter under advisement. The ruling came in 19 days. They upheld the historical usage rights of the 9 consolidated properties, established a minimum downstream flow requirement. But the ruling did something else. Something Fenn read twice before he looked up over his spectacles. In establishing the legal standing of the 9-ranch coalition, the board had addressed Vera's partnership directly. They ruled the Rain-Stanton partnership was valid, cited the doctrine of ratification, 25 months of consistent payment, consistent operation, consistent recognition by all parties, including the bank, as establishing legal standing, regardless of the territorial statute's ambiguity. And then they went further. In a single paragraph, careful and precise, the board stated that the doctrine of ratification, as applied in this case, established a precedent for the legal standing of women operating as co-partners in property agreement in this territory. Fenn set the ruling down. He can still make things inconvenient, but he can't use the water as a weapon anymore. And the partnership, Cole said. The partnership is as solid as this table. He looked at Vera, Mrs. Stanton. You're aware this ruling will be referenced in future cases, the precedent it sets for women's property rights in this territory. Vera looked at the document in Fenn's hands. Quiet for a moment, I didn't plan that, she said. No, Fenn said. The most important precedents rarely are. They stood outside Fenn's office in the July heat, a wagon going by, a dog barking down the block. The ordinary afternoon of a small frontier town, unaware of its own significance in this particular moment. There's something I've been meaning to say, he said. She looked at him. I've been meaning to say it for a while. I keep not saying it, because there's always something that needs doing first. He was aware of the perfect irony of the timing. Dusty street, outside a lawyer's office, July heat. That probably says something about me that isn't entirely flattering. I find it fairly consistent with everything else, she said. He almost smiled. I don't want to be partners, he said. She went still. I mean, I do. That's not. He stopped. Started again. I want more than that. I think you know that. I think you've known it for a while. I didn't mind waiting, she said. Vera, he looked at her, tall in the afternoon light, steady as the fence posts she'd driven into his ground when he was lost in the mountains. I know what I'm saying. I'm asking you to know it too. She looked at the street. Then back at him. It's different, she said quietly. What we have. I didn't expect it to be what it is. What is it? She looked at him steadily. Something I don't want to lose, she said. Something I would have told you a long time ago if I'd been braver about it. He took her hand. Right there on the main street of the county seat, where anyone walking by could see. She was taller than him. Always had been. Always would be. He held her hand on the July street and she let him. And the ordinary afternoon continued around them with complete indifference to what was happening inside it. Which was everything. They were married in October, on the hill behind the ranch, the West Hill, where you could see the whole valley laid out below. Not the hill above the creek with Ruth's grave. That was not the right place for this. Both of them knew it without discussing it. The fall color was out in the timber on the far ridge. Oranges and golds, and the particular red that only comes in October in that country. Like the mountains are showing off one last time before winter. The cattle were small and moving in the south pasture. The ranch buildings below with their repaired roofs and standing fences. And the kitchen garden that had, in its third season under Vera's management, finally produced a potato crop that would carry them through winter without supplementing. Harlan and Doris Cross were there. Jim Brower and his wife. Agnes Holt, who brought her own chair because of a bad knee, and had opinions about the ceremony that she expressed clearly and without being asked, which was consistent with how Agnes approached most things, and why everyone had come to appreciate her. Harwick Finn, who shook both their hands afterward, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has watched a complicated situation arrive at a sensible outcome. A dozen neighbors who had become something closer to friends over the years of shared hardship and shared legal battles, and the particular solidarity of people who have staked their survival on each other. The justice of the peace was also the county surveyor. Read from a card he'd used many times, it showed. Cole's good jacket had a button missing that he'd noticed that morning and not managed to fix. He'd stood in front of the mirror for 30 seconds staring at the gap, done nothing about it. Vera's dress was the dark blue wool, the nicest thing she owned, altered herself. She'd done a good job. But a seam at the left shoulder came loose sometime during the afternoon, and she spent the second half of the reception holding herself at a slight angle so it wouldn't show. Cole noticed. He liked this more than any version of her that was perfectly assembled would have been. Because that was Vera, holding herself at a slight angle, making the adjustment, getting on with it, not making it a thing. There were no speeches. They were not people who made speeches. Jim Brower toasted them with his hat because he'd set his glass down somewhere and couldn't find it, which got a real laugh. the kind that fills a hillside on an October afternoon and carries down into the valley. Doris Cross cried, which she had apparently decided ahead of time she was going to do regardless. Agnes Holt said, "It's about time," loudly enough for the whole hillside to hear, which got a bigger laugh than the hat. The afternoon went on in the easy, slightly disorganized way of an event planned by people who don't plan events. Food appeared. Coffee appeared. At some point, someone produced a fiddle. Cole stood with his wife on that hill, his wife. He turned that word over in his mind, the way you turn over something that fits when you expected it not to. He looked at what they had built and thought about the man he'd been when he first broke this ground. Young, certain of things he turned out not to be right about. The man who had left on a cattle drive that came close to killing him. The man who had buried Ruth in 5 terrible days and then run away on horseback because grief had made the house unbearable, and motion was the only thing he knew how to reach for. The man who had come home to smoke rising from his chimney, and a stranger on his porch. He thought about Ruth, the way he thought about her now, with love and loss and the complicated grief of someone who has outlived a chapter of themselves and knows it, and has made what peace can be made. She would have liked Vera, he was almost certain of that. Ruth had no patience for performance and absolute patience for people who showed up and did the work. And Vera was nothing if not that. He was not going to stop missing Ruth. Grief doesn't leave by being replaced. It makes room, slowly, sometimes painfully, for what comes next. What had come next was a woman who had kept his ranch alive while he was lost in the mountains, who had put a proper stone on his first wife's grave because a wooden cross wasn't enough, who had organized 7 ranches against a man with more money and lawyers than all of them combined, who had, when asked what they had together, said something I don't want to lose in the most honest voice he had ever heard. He had loved 2 women in his life. That was not a contradiction. It was just a life. Vera was standing beside him with the loose shoulder seam in the view of the valley and her hand in his. She was not looking at the view. She was looking at the cattle in the south pasture with the focused attention of someone doing a calculation. 32 head, she said. Don't count cattle at your wedding. I'm estimating. There's a difference. He looked away before she caught him smiling. He didn't quite manage it. You're smiling, she said. I'm squinting. Sun's in my eyes. She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he was still learning the full vocabulary of. Something between amusement and affection, and the particular tolerance of a woman who has decided to keep a person around it despite full knowledge of their qualities. All right, she said, and turned back to the cattle, 32 head, solid animals. Good depth through the barrel. The grass grazed down but not hammered. The fences running their clean lines. Across the hillside in the October light, everything where it was supposed to be. Everything still standing. The years that followed were not easier years. That would be too simple a thing to say about a life on the frontier, where simple is rarely what happens, and easy is mostly a word for other places. There was a dry summer that killed most of the kitchen garden and required selling cattle early. A winter, when Cole broke 2 ribs on a fence post and couldn't do full work for 6 weeks, and Vera managed the ranch with Brower's eldest son, hired on at day rates. A lawsuit, small, quickly resolved. When one of Morrow's subsidiary operations tested the territorial water ruling, they paid Fenn to respond, and the challenge went away within the month. Or Morrow himself began pulling back from the valley around 1886. The Consolidated Valley Partnership had overextended in the eastern part of the territory, and several operations had gone underwater in a bad cattle year. He was not gone from the county. He was simply no longer focused on the valley. And in the absence of his focused attention, the smaller ranches breathed easier, like people who have been standing with their shoulders tight for years. And finally, one afternoon, remember to let them down. It was not justice exactly. Cole had learned not to spend energy, wanting things to be more satisfying than they were. The ranch was his and Vera's. The mortgage was current. The cattle were in good condition. That was the account that mattered. They paid the final mortgage payment in the spring of 1889. Vera had organized the payoff carefully over 2 years, building the reserve in a separate column in the ledger, watching it accumulate with patient, unglamorous attention, never assuming the number would be there until it was. The day they made the final payment, they rode to Garrison together. Vera handed the certified payment to Hollis. Voss had retired by then, who stamped the mortgage document and handed it back. They were in his office for 11 minutes. When they came out, Vera had the document in her hand. She stood on the steps of the bank building in the spring morning and looked at it. He had seen that face before, on the specific occasions when something she had worked toward for a long time arrived. She folded it once along a clean crease. Put it in her coat pocket. Well, she said. Well, he said. She started down the steps. He fell in beside her. I was thinking, she said, as they walked toward the horses, about the east quarter. If we redirect the drainage channel another 20 yards south, we could bring another 5 acres into production next season. 5 acres, maybe 6, he thought about it. That's another season of work before we see return. Yes, she said, but the return would be worth it, he said. She stopped walking, looked at him. You didn't let me finish. You were going to say worth it. You don't know that. I absolutely know that. She started walking again, chin slightly elevated, the expression of a woman who is not going to give him the satisfaction of agreeing right now. You've gotten smug, she said. I've gotten accurate, he said. There's a difference, she almost smiled. The almost, as always, which he had come to understand was its own kind of answer. One evening, years later, the valley going gold with late light, the kind of October evening that particular country saves, for when you've earned it. Cole came up the west hill and found Vera sitting there, looking out over the valley. The way the light leaves the flat ground first, stays longest on the ridges. He sat beside her without being asked. They watched the light together. Do you ever think about it? She said. About what? About how different everything would be if you hadn't stopped in Garrison. If you'd ridden past, he thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. Sometimes. I try to remember why I stopped. Do you remember? Not clearly. I remember hearing about it from the merchant. I remember it seemed. He paused. Wrong to walk past. She nodded. A quiet nod. I've thought about that a lot, she said. Whether I would have done the same thing. If I'd been the one passing through, what do you think? She was quiet for a moment. The light was almost gone from the flat ground now, the cattle settling for the evening. The ranch buildings small and solid below them. I think I would have wanted to, she said. I don't know if I would have. She turned to look at him. Wanting and doing are different things. You didn't just want to. You did it. It was $80. It was $80, she said. And everything that came after it. The years had settled on both of them the way years settle on people who have worked hard in hard country. There were lines on his face that weren't there in 1884. Her dark hair had a thread of gray at the temple that she absolutely did not discuss, and he absolutely did not mention. She was still the tallest person he knew, still the first one awake every morning. Still coffee at the kitchen window, looking east, at the dark, and then the gray. And then whatever the morning decided to be, he had never once, in all those years, gotten up before her. 4:32. Every single morning. He thought she knew. He was fairly certain she'd always known. Neither of them had ever said a word about it. I'm glad I stopped, he said. She looked at the valley. I know, she said quietly, and then, after a moment, so am I. The valley was fully in shadow now. The last light on the far ridge going from gold to orange to the pale that comes just before it disappears. She got up and he watched her rise to her full height, the way he'd watched it 1,000 times and still noticed. That particular economy of motion. No wasted movement, no performance. Just a person who had made peace with exactly how much space she occupied in the world, and had stopped apologizing for it. Come on, she said. I haven't started supper yet. She started down the hill. He followed the way he'd learned to follow. Not behind exactly, but matching her pace, staying alongside, which on the downslope meant stretching his stride a little. He'd gotten used to that. A neighbor's hand was coming up the road below. looked up and saw them coming down, saw her height. The slight double take that some people still did, even after years, even after everything. The hand tipped his hat. Looked at Vera, that familiar half-second of recalibration, then looked away. Evening, folks, evening. Vera said. She didn't slow down. She never did. Below, the ranch held its ground in the October dark. The cattle breathed in the south pasture. The fences stood. The barn roof held against the evening wind. The chimney would be lit soon. The kitchen warm. By the time they got there. Two people coming in from the cold to something they had built from almost nothing and refused to let go of. And in the limestone corner of the West Hill, a carved marker held two names, Ruth Raines, and the years of her short life. In letters that had weathered now into the stone as though they'd always been there, tended by the seasons, standing in the tall grass of an October evening, while the ranch that bore her husband's name endured below her, alive. Imperfect, entirely real, the words Vera had chosen all those years ago. She was here and it mattered. Still there. Still true. Some things are carved once and hold. Below it, added years later in a quieter season, a second stone, Vera Stanton Raines, 1856 to 1937. She stayed, which is, if you think about it, everything Ruth Stone said. In different words, Cole Raines lived to be 73, long enough to see the territory become a state. Long enough to watch Vera assess the first motor car that came through Garrison with the same focused attention she had once turned on a cracked pipe fitting. He died in October, the month of smoke and gold, which seemed right. Vera outlasted him by 8 years. Still up at 4:30, still coffee at the east window, still the tallest person in most rooms she entered. She never stopped being noticed when she walked in somewhere. She had long since stopped caring about that. What she cared about, whether the people she loved were fed and warm. Whether they were carrying more than they had to carry alone. That was the account that mattered. Not the universe settling scores. Not kindness coming back in neat proportion to what was given. Just this, one decent thing. Done without thinking, picked up by someone who decided it deserved an answer, and what they built with it, which was more than either of them planned. Which was enough.